The Battle of Bailén was fought in 1808 by the Spanish army of Andalusia, led by generals Francisco Castaños and Theodore von Reding, and the Imperial French Army's Second Corps d'Observation de la Gironde under General Pierre Dupont de la Retagne. The heaviest fighting took place near Bailén, a village by the Guadalquivir River in the Jaézquotán province of southern Spain. In June 1808, following the widespread uprisings against the French occupation of Spain, Napoleon organized French units into flying columns to pacify Spain's major centers of resistance. One of these, under General Dupont, was dispatched across the Sierra Morena and south through Andalusia to the port of Cadiz, where a French naval squadron lay at the mercy of the Spanish. The Emperor was confident that with 20,000 men, Dupont would crush any opposition encountered on the way. Events proved otherwise, and after storming and plundering Córdoba in July, Dupont retraced his steps to the north of the province to await reinforcements. Meanwhile, General Castaños, commanding the Spanish field army at San Roque, and General von Reding, governor of Malaga, traveled to Seville to negotiate with the Seville junta, a patriotic assembly committed to resisting the French incursions, and to turn the province's combined forces against the French. Dupont's failure to leave Andalusia proved disastrous. Between 16 and 19 July, Spanish forces converged on the French positions stretched out along villages on the Guadalquivir and attacked at several points, forcing the confused French defenders to shift their divisions this way and that. With Castaños pinning Dupont downstream at Andújar, Reding successfully forced the river at Mengibar and seized Bailén, interposing himself between the two wings of the French army. Caught between Castaños and Reding, Dupont attempted vainly to break through the Spanish line at Bailén in 3 bloody and desperate charges, losing more than 2,500 men. His counterattacks defeated, Dupont called for an armistice and was compelled to sign the Convention of Andújar, which stipulated the surrender of almost 18,000 men, making Bailén the worst disaster and capitulation of the Peninsular War. In one of the most controversial episodes of the campaign, Dupont compelled his subordinate, General Vidal, to surrender his division despite Vidal being positioned outside the Spanish encirclement, with a good chance of escape. When news of the catastrophe reached the French high command in Madrid, the result was a general retreat to the Ebro, abandoning much of Spain to the insurgents. France's enemies in Spain and throughout Europe cheered at this first check to the hitherto unbeatable imperial armies. Tales of Spanish heroism inspired Austria and showed the force of nationwide resistance to Napoleon, setting in motion the rise of the Fifth Coalition against France. Alarmed by these developments, Napoleon briefly took command of the Spanish theatre and, at the head of fresh troops and overwhelming numbers, dealt devastating blows to the vacillating Spanish rebels and their British allies, recapturing Madrid in November 1808. In doing so, however, the French military committed enormous resources to a long war of attrition characterized by heavy losses to the implacable Spanish guerrillas, ultimately leading to the expulsion of French armies from Spain and the exposure of southern France to invasion in 1814 by combined Spanish, British, and Portuguese forces. Background: between 1807 and 1808, thousands of French troops marched into Spain to support a Spanish invasion of Portugal orchestrated by Napoleon, who used the opportunity to initiate intrigues against the Spanish royal family. A coup d'état, instigated by Spanish aristocrats with French support, forced Charles IV from his throne in favor of his son Ferdinand, and in April, Napoleon removed both royals to Bayonne to secure their abdication and replace the Spanish Bourbon line with a Bonapartist dynasty headed by his brother Joseph Bonaparte. However, none of these politicians sat well with the Spanish masses, who declared their loyalty to the deposed Ferdinand and revolted at the prospect of a foreign ruler. An uprising by the citizens of Madrid broke out on May 2, slew 150 French soldiers, and was violently stamped out by Marshal Murat's elite guards and Mameluke cavalry. Joseph's entry into his prospective kingdom was delayed as guerrillas poured down from the mountains and seized or threatened the main roads. "You are making a mistake, sire. Your glory will not be enough to subjugate Spain. I shall fail and the limits of your power will be exposed." Joseph Bonaparte to Napoleon on 26 May. Joseph Bonaparte, in absentia, was proclaimed King of Spain and the Indies in Madrid, his envoys receiving the acclamations of the Spanish notables. The Madrileños, however, were indignant. Spanish soldiers quietly withdrew to insurgent-held villages and outposts outside the city, and only Murat's 20,000 bayonets kept the city in order. Outside the capital, the French strategic situation deteriorated rapidly. The bulk of the French army, 80,000 strong, could hold only a narrow strip of central Spain stretching from Pamplona and San Sebastian in the north through to Madrid and Toledo to the south. Murat, stricken in an outbreak of rheumatic colic which swept the French camp, quit his command and returned to France for treatment. The Spanish priests would have rejoiced if the hand of God had been laid on him whom they called the Butcher of the 2nd of May. General Savary, with much of Spain in open revolt, Napoleon established a headquarters at Bayonne on the Spanish frontier to reorganize his beleaguered forces and redress the situation. Having little respect for his Spanish opponents, the emperor decided that a swift display of force would cow the insurgents and quickly consolidate his control of Spain. To this end, Napoleon dispatched a number of flying columns to throttle the rebellion by seizing and pacifying Spain's major cities. From Madrid, Marshal Bessières pushed northwest into Old Castile with 25,000 men and sent a detachment east into Aragon, aiming to capture Santander with one hand and Zaragoza with the other. General Moncey marched toward Valencia with 29,350 men, and General Duhesme marshaled 12,710 troops in Catalonia and put Girona under siege. Finally, General Dupont, a distinguished field commander, was to lead 13,000 men south toward Seville and ultimately the port of Cadiz, which sheltered Admiral François Rousselet's fleet from the Royal Navy. War reaches Andalusia. Dupont's corps primarily fielded of second-line forces of a distinctly unimpressive character. These second-line troops, originally raised as provisional or reserve formations, had been intended either for internal police services or garrison duty in Prussia, evidence that Napoleon intended the Spanish campaign to be a mere promenade. This force approached Córdoba in early June and in their first formal battle on Andalusian soil, captured the bridge at Alcalá, sweeping past the Spanish troops under Colonel Don Pedro de Echevarri that attempted to block their progress. The French entered Córdoba that same afternoon and ransacked the town for 4 days. However, in the face of increasingly menacing mass uprisings across Andalusia, Dupont decided to withdraw to the Sierra Morena, counting on help from Madrid. The French retreated fitfully in the sweltering heat, burdened with some 500 wagons of loot and 1,200 ill. A French surgeon remarked, "Our little army carried enough baggage for 150,000 men. Mere captains required wagons drawn by 4 mules. We counted more than 50 wagons per battalion." The result of the plunder of Córdoba. All our movements were impeded. We owed our defeat to the greed of our generals. General Gobert's division set out from Madrid on July 2 to add weight to Dupont's expedition. However, only one brigade of his division ultimately reached Dupont, the rest being needed to hold the road north against the guerrillas. Reinforcements across the Sierra. Napoleon and the French strategists, anxious about their communications with Bayonne and wary of a British descent upon a Biscayan coast already in open revolt, initially prioritized operations in the north of Spain. In mid-June, General Lasalle's victory at Cabazón simplified matters tremendously, with the Spanish militias around Valladolid destroyed and much of Old Castile overrun. Savary shifted his gaze south and resolved to reopen communications with Dupont in Andalusia. Apart from the menace in the north, Napoleon was most anxious to secure the Andalusian provinces, where the traditional rural peasantry was expected to resist Joseph's rule. On June 19, General Vidal with the 2nd Division was dispatched south from Toledo to force a passage over the Sierra Morena, hold the mountains from the guerrillas, and link up with Dupont, pacifying Castile-La Mancha along the way. Vidal set out with 6,000 men, 700 horse, and 12 guns, joined during the march by small detachments under Generals Rois and Ligier-Belair. The column raced across the plains, encountering no resistance, although stragglers were seized and cut down by the locals. Reaching the Sierra on June 26, the column found a detachment of Spanish regulars, smugglers, and guerrillas with 6 guns under Lieutenant Colonel Valdecanos blocking the Puerta del Rey. Vidal's troops stormed the ridge and overran the enemy cannon, losing 17 dead or wounded. They then pushed south over the mountains toward La Carolina. The next day they encountered a detachment of Dupont's troops preparing to attack these same passes from the south side. With this junction, communications between Dupont and Madrid were re-established after a month of silence. Confused orders. Vidal carried new orders from Madrid and Bayonne. Dupont was instructed to stop his march on Cadiz and fall back northeastwards on the mountains, watching the Spanish movements in Andalusia while awaiting the reinforcements to be released upon the capitulation of Zaragoza and Valencia. These capitulations never came. For a time Marshal Moncey was simply nowhere to be found. At length his defeat at the gates of Valencia surfaced. Some 17,000 Spaniards under the Conde de Cervellin massed victoriously around that city as Moncey gave up in disgust, having lost 1,000 men in a vain attempt to storm the walls. Suddenly, all prospects evaporated of Moncey's corps pivoting west from Valencia toward Granada and coupling with Dupont in a two-pronged invasion of Andalusia. Nor were troops forthcoming from Aragon, as Zaragoza shook off repeated French assaults and vowed to fight to the death. Meanwhile, Savary set to work preparing for the arrival of Joseph in his new capital. Many of the scattered French formations were drawn back around Madrid for security. Dupont would remain close at hand to succor the capital if Becerra's campaign in the north took a turn for the worse and Spanish armies appeared on the horizon. Yet at no time was Dupont's Andalusian expedition altogether scrapped. Savary continued to issue vague orders promising reinforcements at an undisclosed date, while Napoleon fumed at the prospect of abandoning even Andújar to the Spaniards. With events hanging in the air, Dupont chose to hold his ground along the Guadalquivir, sacking and occupying the town of Bailén and the provincial capital of Jaézquén. Instead of completing his retrograde movement to the strong positions atop the Sierra's defiles, Napoleon wrote lightly, "Even if he suffers a setback, he will just have to come back over the Sierra." Spain prepares. On learning of the French incursion into the southern provinces, General Castanos, guessing Dupont's intentions, prepared to entrench his army in a fortified camp across from the strong point of Cadiz. But Dupont's retrograde movement rendered these precautions unnecessary. Setting up a general headquarters in Utrera, Castanos organized the Army of Andalusia into 4 divisions under General von Reding, the Marquis de Coupigny, Felix Jones, and a 4th under Manuel La Peña. Colonel Juan de la Cruz Murden led an additional column of some 1,000 skirmishers, armed peasants, and other light infantry, stalled on the Guadalquivir, while Dupont lingered at Andújar with 2 divisions, attempting to master the strategic Madrid-Seville highway and the wide plains which it crossed. Castarno's four divisions advanced steadily from the south, and guerrillas from Granada marched to bar the road to the Sierra and La Mancha beyond. Vidal's division was posted east to Bailén with a view to guarding these nearby mountain passes, and on July 1 Vidal was forced to dispatch a brigade under General Cassan to curb the advance of the guerrillas on Jaéquatén and La Carolina, stretching the French line still further east. Meanwhile, General Liga Belair with 1,500 men moved into a forward post at Mengibar, a village on the south bank of the Guadalquivir. At Andújar, a tower by the river was fortified and small field works constructed on the south bank to forestall an enemy crossing, but the Guadalquivir being fordable at so many points, and open to fire from the surrounding hills, Dupont's defences did not inspire much confidence. Cassan, after driving the guerrillas off en route, returned to Bailén on July 5 with 200 dead or wounded and nothing to show for his exertion, the Spaniards having plundered the towns of all provisions. Glimmers of the long-promised reinforcements appeared at last. Generals Gobet and Lafrance passed the Puerta del Rey July 15, leaving behind a strong garrison in the Morena, and descended into Andalusia with their remaining infantry and cuirassiers. Dupont now had over 20,000 men idling along the Guadalquivir while the Spaniards massed and approached. But supplies were scarce and the Spanish peasants had deserted their fields, obliging Dupont's wearied men to bring in the harvest, grind the grain, and bake their own rations. 600 men fell ill during their fortnight's stay by drinking the putrid waters of the Guadalquivir. According to French testimony, the situation was terrible. Every night, we heard armed peasants roaming around thus, drawn to our goods, and every night we expected to be assassinated. Early fighting on July 9, General Lane Pena's division took up a position extending from El Carpio to Porcuna, and the Army of Andalusia began a number of demonstrations against the French. From west to east along the Guadalquivir, Castarnos with 14,000 men in two divisions approached Dupont at Andújar. Pupini advanced his division to Villanueva, and Reading prepared to force a passage at Mengibar and swing north to Bailén, outflanking the French and cutting Dupont's line of retreat to the mountains. Marching east to Jaéquatén, Reading delivered a strong attack against the French right wing between July 2 and July 3, sending the 3rd Swiss Regiment into the teeth of Cassan's brigade. The Spaniards were forced back, but the isolated French brigade felt its danger, and on the 4th Cassan fell back over the Guadalquivir to Bailén, leaving only a few companies to guard the ferry at Mengibar. Reading assaulted Mengibar anew on July 13 and drove Ligier Belair from the village after a hard fight. At the appearance of Vidal's division, however, the Spanish column quietly drew back and French infantry reclaimed the town. The next day Coupigny tested the grounds at Villanueva and engaged the French piquets opposite him in a sharp skirmish. Castarnos reached the heights at Ionilla on July 15 and, setting up a battery on a ridge overlooking Andújar, opened fire on Dupont. At the same time, 1,600–4,000 skirmishers and irregulars under Colonel de la Cruz forded the river near Marmoleo and attacked towards Dupont's rear, but were handily repulsed by a French battalion and dispersed into the hills. Alarmed by this show of force, Dupont called on Vidal to release a battalion or even a brigade to his assistance, and Vidal, judging that Mengibar was not seriously threatened, set out in the night with his entire division. The arrival of Vidal with this sizable force put an end to the threat at Andújar but gravely imperiled the French right wing, leaving Ligier Belair seriously denuded of troops in his fight against Reading.